Good afternoon and good morning to folks who might be on the West Coast. My name is Laura Hughes, and I serve as the Director of Narrative Strategy at PolicyLink. I am ecstatic and humbled to be in community with you today and able to facilitate creating conditions to win the power of narrative strategy on behalf of PolicyLink with two giants, Mark Solomon and Desmond Meade. As you're equally excited, I just want to do one housekeeping just to get it out of the way up front. We will have ample times for questions today, so feel free to drop them in the question and answer box that's at the bottom of your dashboard on your Zoom screen, or you can use the chat feature, either one, okay? And we will share the recording with you shortly, about a week after this as well. So, PolicyLink is a national research and action institute advancing racial equity and economic justice by lifting up what works. At PolicyLink, achieving equity, just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential is the moral imperative, a potent antidote to inequality, and a superior growth model. Equity aims to equip everyone, especially those who've been left behind, with the resources that allow them to contribute and prosper. It's a pragmatic approach to solving the nation's greatest problems and source of tension: economic inequality and racial exclusion. Equity addresses race forthrightly and productively, but it's not about benefiting one group at the expense of another. When smart, sustainable strategies are tailored to the needs of the most vulnerable communities, opportunities improve for all. To advance equity, PolicyLink advocates for groundbreaking policy changes that enable everyone, especially people of color, to be economically secure, live in healthy communities of opportunity, and benefit from a just society. PolicyLink is guided by the belief that the solutions to the nation's challenges lie with those closest to these challenges. When the wisdom, voice, and experience of those traditionally absent from policymaking drive the process, profound policy transformations emerge. This session will unpack the power of communications and narrative strategy to make it possible for all people in America to imagine, believe, and make real systems and policy that work for all. Our speakers today, Mark and Desmond, will surface key lessons from recognizable winning movements, spotlighting the narrative strategy that created the enabling conditions to win. We ask ourselves, what does it take to create a new ideological framework for our nation that allows us to truly see and appreciate the humanity in everyone, and to be so compelled by that understanding that there's no other choice but to redesign our nation to work for all? So two things happened this morning. One, I couldn't sleep, so I called my sister and practiced my intro with her because I was nervous. And her response was, "I'm cheering for you. And damn, those speakers are amazing." Second thing that happened this morning was as I was reading my morning meditation from Black Liturgies from Cole Arthur Riley in the section on wonder, the quote that I came across was that we would be able to see a place not just from within it, but from a distance is a gift we do not readily comprehend. Today, we get to join with leaders whose joy and power I know you'll feel to look at marriage equality and restoration of voting rights from within and from a distance. I candidly can't think of a more powerful way to talk about the conditions necessary to win at this exact moment, Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. We have opportunities in front of us, necessity in front of us, and challenges in front of us. At PolicyLink, Jen, if you could take us to the next slide, I'll just share this. At PolicyLink, this is our definition of narrative. And we believe by repeating the right narratives, you can create a new tipping point in public consciousness and create the conditions for you to advance your agenda and broaden your base. And now for the introductions. Now, I would say these two tremendous human beings might have told me that they were like, oh, the introductions, but I'm going to read all of it because they are stunning. First is Mark Solomon. Mark is a nationally recognized political strategist and campaign leader with 25 years of experience in strategy, campaign management, policy development and execution, messaging and communications leadership, and field mobilization. Mark has a deep track record of assembling winning bipartisan campaigns to change narratives, pass legislation, win ballot measures, and drive national momentum on the most challenging issues. Mark was one of the key architects of marriage equality movement, having led full time on the case from the first state of Massachusetts through the final Supreme Court win that established marriage nationwide. He was the national campaign director for Freedom to Marry. Mark drove the marriage movement's political strategy. My fangirl moment, I'm gonna let y'all know that this has been on my desk for months. It helps to drive so much of the strategy we use at Policy Among Narrative, and I will use on my bookmarks candidly when we get to the question and answer section. Our second speaker is Desmond Meade. Desmond is a transformational leader whose commitment to justice has impacted millions. Desmond is the former president of Florida Voting Restoration Amendment. His efforts to uplift humanity have consistently earned him national and international acclaim. Meade is a Ford Global Fellow, a 2021 MacArthur Genius Fellow, and was recognized in 2019 as one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. As president and executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, Meade led the successful passage of Amendment 4, a grassroots citizens initiative which restored voting rights to over 1.4 million Floridians with past felony conviction. Amendment 4 represents the single largest expansion of voting rights in the United States in half a century and brought an end to 150 years of Jim Crow era law in Florida. Under his leadership, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition was distinguished in 2023 by being nominated for the 2023 Nobel Peace Prize. And my fangirl moment, Desmond has two tremendous books, both of which I was able to consume, and also will reference when I ask some questions later. It is with such joy that I turn it to Mark and Desmond.
Well, thank you, Laura, so much. What a beautiful introduction. And, I get to, it truly is a great gift to be here with my friend and one of my heroes, Desmond Meade. I had the deep fortune post our National Marriage Equality win to work as part of the Amendment 4 campaign for Desmond, with Desmond in 2017, 2018. And that was just one of the, a great opportunity to learn and to deepen my own commitment to changing narrative and winning on important issues. And so it really is great to be here with Desmond. Desmond, you're I'm gonna lead through a deck, but Desmond will be chiming in at various points. But Desmond, do you have some things you want to say at the outset?
Of course, everybody, with all this love going around right now, it's definitely an honor. And one of the things that just heavy on my mind is that, especially when we're talking about communication, right, and how we can effectively use communication to advance movements. Part of it is having the willingness to want to listen. And so it's a huge shout out to Policy Link and you, Laura, right, for actually bringing me and Mark together for this webinar, being willing, right, to create an environment where people can listen to some of the folks that's done work on the ground. Because so many times, and I'll be honest with you, I have not since 2018 been asked, right, the questions that you've been asking, or given the opportunity that you've been given. And so, and that is a glaring issue that we do have to deal with. But I definitely want to give you your kudos. Definitely want to give Policy Link their flowers as well for having the foresight to put this together. And as always, you made it hard for anybody to refuse, because you had Mark Solomon on here, and I love him. I love Mark Solomon very much. He's a brother from another mother. So I'm looking forward to our time together today.
Love it. I was going to say brother from another mother, but I'm glad you did. So, all right, we can go to the next slide. That would be great to get us started. First of all, people change their minds. I mean, in this moment, as that Laura was referring to, where I'm sure 98%, if not 100% of the people on the Zoom are probably pretty bummed out about the recent elections. It's really important to note that people change their minds on fundamental important issues. And when I first started on this journey on marriage equality in around the year 2000, we were, under 40%. We were sort of the, Republicans were using the issue to attack. Democrats were running away from the issue as quickly as they could. It wasn't even in 2008, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton opposed marriage equality, and and supported civil unions. So it's been a journey. But today we're at 71% support. It's holding. So that's the journey I want to talk about. And really, I think it's super important to not feel overly pessimistic because at this moment in history, because people change, pendulum, things are on a pendulum, and things get better, and then they get worse, and then they get better a little bit. Hopefully they keep, hopefully Dr. King is right, and things are bending towards justice. But there is hope. So I think that's important. And on the next slide, speaking of hope, so you'll see here, people were like, this thing is never Amendment 4, the Voting Rights Restoration Amendment on the ballot in 2018. People were like, this thing is never going to pass. Democrats will mainly vote for it. Republicans are going to vote against it. And Florida has this wild and crazy requirement that you need 60% to pass a constitutional amendment. And yet, here we were. And I think this, Desmond, do you have any thoughts on what you're seeing here?
When you were talking, Mark, and once again, just the theme of this webinar, it's just bouncing all around my head. I think that, there's so much hope. You speak about even the aftermath of this election, but I see a lot of opportunity, right? And the biggest opportunity I see is learning how to effectively communicate to folks. Because I think, if nothing else, this election showed what happens when you don't have effective communication, what happens when you're speaking above people and not to people, right? And knowing that, listen, matter of fact, one of the things that had popped in my head was that, a lot of times when we communicate, we have to ask ourselves this huge question. Are we communicating so people could hear us, right? Or are we communicating so we could just hear ourselves, right? And that sometimes is two different things. And when you talk about, what we face here in Florida, when I was looking at, coming up with this crazy idea, and I tell folks that if my mom was alive, she would have told me I was crazy too, because all of the experts said, what the heck are you thinking, right? How are you engaging in the most controversial issue in the most controversial state during, at the time, the most controversial political climate there was, right? There's no way that this is even going to make it right on the ballot. And I think part of that prognosis was based on the way people were used to thinking about communication and the way they were viewing things. And I think a lot of folks did not know that there was an alternate way, or there's a different way that we could have talked about it. There's a different way that people could view it, right? So people saying, hey, we're against marriage equality at this moment. Well, maybe it's not because they're necessarily against it. Maybe it wasn't presented to them in a way that would allow them to be supportive of it, right? And so that when people would say no to me, it wasn't, oh, let's automatically foreclose on them. It was a challenge. How can I communicate this in a different way, right, to actually get them to support? And I think that was something that I recognized early on.
Yeah. Next slide. So my view is that the golden rule is real. I think that's Desmond's view too. that people at their best want to treat others the way they want to be treated. Doesn't mean they always do it. Doesn't mean I always do it. But first, they need to be able to connect to the individual making the case, to the cause, and genuinely empathize. And we're always up against those who benefit from the status quo, who use fear and division to dissuade. So I believe in the golden rule, but it's not as simple. It's a simple concept, but it's not simple to ensure that it's applied in different in different causes. And next slide. So, I think one of the reasons why Desmond and I are, view ourselves as brothers from another mother is that we both view ourselves as persuaders, and that's part of our role on this planet. I have never seen anyone bring their whole self to an engagement more than Desmond Meade. And it's something that I've always done in my work on marriage equality. I'm always about, and I know Desmond is always about connecting as a human being first and foremost. This is about figuring out a way to connect with somebody. I can't tell you how many times when I was talking to lawmakers in Massachusetts, the very first marriage equality state, I'd look around their office when I'd first come in and try to find something that I could connect with. Oh my gosh, you're a baseball fan. I am too. I grew up loving the Kansas City Royals. That's where I'm from, and it's like figuring out how to connect to people as human beings. I think what Desmond was just saying about about how we speak these days, or what's relevant in the aftermath of the election, treating people you're trying to persuade as equals, definitely not as bigots. And I think part of the problem with social media and Twitter and Facebook and just duking things out online is that conversations just get shut down way too quickly. You don't persuade on issues that are deep and fundamental in a moment, and you don't do it by talking down to somebody and saying, well, I'm awakened, or I'm woke, whatever that, like, this is the way things must be, and you are wrong and an idiot. That is, and that's what happens way too often. But if you're yeah, go ahead.
Mark, if I could interject for a second, because I think, and I don't want to get too far away from this, especially when you talk about that connection that you made even when you're going into the office. But one of the things that got me was, and for those who don't know background, when I was contemplating Amendment 4, there was this conference, it's called a BIS conference. Ballot Initiative Strategy Center puts that on like every year or so. And kind of like, snuck in one year, and it just so happened that marriage equality was showing some of the videos that they were using, and it was something about the video that just tugged at me, just grabbed my heart, and I was able to immediately connect with this person that was talking about someone who they cared about, someone who they loved, and that really helped. Matter of fact, I didn't meet Mark at this point yet, right? But I knew about marriage equality, and I used that concept. And when you talk about that connection, it was also the connection between someone who was directly impacted, right, and the audience, right? So they could feel like, wow, like I'm seeing my granddaughter, I'm seeing my grandson. When you see a person that's talking about wanting to have a second chance, or because they made a mistake, God knows how many years ago, right? Our audience was able to connect with the people that we had on there, because first of all, we had real people that was actually experiencing that, and it was something that was able to penetrate the screen, right? That and live in some, I guess, in the cloak of authenticity that made a difference. I really felt it made a difference because it made people connect on a much stronger level that was able then to withstand what Mark had referenced about those who were against it was going to use fear and all kinds of tactics to divide people and to shun or to scare people away from actually supporting the movement. And so what it's an old adage, blood is thicker than water, right? And so when you're able to really connect with people in a profound way that goes beyond something superficial, you're able to withstand the attacks that's coming, especially when you get nearer to an election day. It's the numbers start to drop a little bit, right? And so you have to figure out ways to keep the number from dropping below what you need to successfully pass. And we were able to do it because we started out believing in that connection. And I learned about that connection through looking at marriage equality videos.
Well, it's thank you. I'm glad that it was helpful, and you did it. Continuing on these bullets, like it takes a long time to change a long held view. It's like people expect that. Too often people expect that you share your story, you show a video or a few, and people just will change a long held view quickly.
Or put a celebrity in a commercial to tell you to change your view.
The perspectives that exactly. No, it's and you have to give people time. It wouldn't do Desmond any good if if they would have said to him, yeah, we're with you, and then vote against him in the voting booth. It's like you really have to change people's minds, and then answer questions, especially the uncomfortable ones. And I can't even tell you how many uncomfortable questions I was asked during 15 years of marriage of working on marriage equality. Like, how did you know you were gay? Why are you gay? Why and on and on and on. Like you like to play football? I thought you were gay. It's like, and sometimes you go home and you pound the wall a bit after some really stupid questions, but or questions I thought of. But you have to, if you view yourself as a persuader, you need to listen, and you've got to presume that the questions are coming from a decent place. That's now I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the people that were like dead set against us, who were leading campaigns against us. I'm talking about people who were genuinely trying to sort these questions out in their minds. And the approach I always took, and I know Desmond took this because he loved going to Trump rallies to try to find converts, is treating people that you're working on as those who aren't yet with us rather than our opponents.
I think you got a point there. It's not only just being prepared for uncomfortable conversations or questions, but also being willing and courageous enough, right, to go in uncomfortable places. One of the stories that I tell is that there were times when I'm driving across the state of Florida, and there were certain places where I actually had to stop, get out of my car, go in my trunk and get something out of my trunk and put it in my back seat, right? And sometimes I always used to do a quiz and get people to guess what it was, and it would be like the Bible, a gun, or what. And basically what it was a Trump sign. It says, "Make America Great Again." Right. And the reason why I would put it in the back seat, in case if I got pulled over by the police in some of these counties, that when they approach the car with the gun drawn, right, and the gun will be drawn, right, at least the first thing they will see is a "Make America Great Again" sign, and think that maybe I'm one of those good Black folks, right? And maybe I make it home to my family that night. And so that was something that was real, but that still couldn't stop me from actually going to talk to him, because so many times I've seen so many different campaigns and so many different initiatives that, they follow the old adage, mobilize the base, move the middle and neutralize the opposition. And we were like, no, we need to mobilize our opposition too. We need to engage them. We need to have these uncomfortable situations where we can have a conversation. And what I was pleasantly surprised with was that, just like you said from the very beginning, that if we get past a lot of these barriers, we'll see that there's so much more in common. That there's the same fears that you have, other folks have, right? And then you'll start realizing more and more how the powers that be would create this narrative to make you think that, oh, we can't talk to those people, or we shouldn't talk to those people, we shouldn't like them. And I don't think anybody want to live in a society where they're scared of their own neighbor. You know, that's not how we want to live, not here in these United States, man. We want to be able to walk out our front door and wave at our neighbor and say good day, and knowing that if something happens, our neighbor will come to our rescue, we will come to their rescue. We do not want to live in this type of divisive state like this. And we were able to break through those barriers and find out, man, that there were so many people. Over 1 million people who were Republicans, registered Republicans, actually voted for our initiative, right? And because we were able to break those barriers, we were also able to, now think about this. Recreational marijuana in Florida drew about over $90 million in opposition towards it, right? Recreational use of marijuana. Here we are in Amendment 4, back in 2018, talking about the most significant ballot initiative in Florida that had the potential to dramatically shift the political landscape, right, in Florida. And knowing that Florida is one of the top states and able to get an opposition money into, right? They could raise a ton of money in an instant. And we know that when opposition dollars come in, for every dollar that comes against you, you have to spend two. We didn't have that kind of money, right? But to think that we were engaged in an initiative to restore voting rights to over 1.4 million people, how could it be that not one penny of opposition money was spent against it? But yet they spent over $90 million to stop medical marijuana. And I think that part of that is a willingness to put yourself in uncomfortable positions and have, like Mark said, uncomfortable conversations early on that sets the tone for the work that you're doing. And you're able now to neutralize, or you're able to mitigate any potential blowbacks, mitigate any potential opposition that makes your work harder.
Amen. Next slide. So I was just reading a book. I got the chance to take a week of vacation. I was reading a book about Abraham Lincoln, and he said it quite well. And he was certainly one of our country's great persuaders. Great quote: "If you win a man to your cause, first convince him that you are his true friend. Therein is a drop of honey that catches his heart, which, say what he will, is the greatest highroad to his reason. On the contrary, make him as one to be shunned or despised, and he'll retreat within himself, close all avenues to his heart. And even if your cause is the naked truth itself, you won't be able to get through to him." So honest Abe knew the key to persuasion that we are talking about today.
Hey, that sounds like a playbook for Donald Trump. That sounds like a playbook for Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So next one. So now I'm going to get into the fight that I worked on for 15 years, and here's what we we're encountering around making the case. Is people are like, okay, yeah, I get the golden rule. That's important, but I don't know who LGBT people are. I and I'd say this because I can't tell you how many focus groups I sat through listening to people talk about gay folks, and they're like, who are these people? People I've seen are loners. They live in those cities out there. They live in San Francisco. They live in New York. It's And then why do they want to marry? And, you know, it might sound strange to all of us today, but people are like, I don't understand why they want to marry. Is this a political statement? Do they want to, you know, is it, you know, do they want to take this institution that's so important to all of us and mess with it? You know, how is it, you know, and then how is it going to affect my life, my family? Is this, and you know, the argument that scared people the most, that got us, you know, that was the most challenging for our fight to overcome was, is this, you know, how is this going to affect my kids? Is this going to make my kids gay? Is this going to, you know, and people, it's not a rational thing, but it's an emotional thing. And, you know, when the reptilian part of people's brains starts firing, it's hard to get them off of it. So, and then, you know, it's like, what about my faith tradition? My faith, you know, I've been, you know, I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm a practicing, you know, lots of faith traditions taught that there was something wrong with homosexuality. And so am I, you know, what am I saying about my own personal tradition? And if I, you know, if I go along with this. So these were what was going through people's minds. And we, even if they were being super polite to us and saying, yeah, that sounds interesting, let me think about it. I knew, you know, because, you know, that this was what was going on in people's hearts and minds. And so meeting people where they are and engaging with them is crucial. So next slide. So, you know, what is important in the two fights that we're talking about, and in every fight for, you know, in every one of these challenging fights, sort of human rights, human dignity fights, it's like, it's figuring out, you know, it's understanding what values guide everybody's lives. And, you know, these were the words that you know, came out of in the marriage movement, but it applies everywhere. Like people think of themselves as people who keep their word, who have integrity, who, you know, it's like, what's important, what values, what guide your life. So it's like, how do we figure out how to genuinely connect and help people get to a place where, in order to live up to their own deepest values, they need to support your cause. And so next slide. So on merit, yeah, go ahead, Desmond,
No,
please.
so I have a story for that.
Yeah,
You know,
please.
one of the as you mentioned, you know, I love challenges. I didn't want to start by trying to mobilize the people who I felt would support the effort. And so I initially went to people who I thought were going to be against the effort. And I remember it was during the election in 2016, I believe, early voting. And I went to a guy wearing, he was wearing a T-shirt that was supporting one of the Republican candidates for governor. And I remember his wife standing next to him, and I asked him a very simple question. And that was, do they know anybody who they loved who's ever made a mistake in their life? You know, and believe me, it wasn't rocket science for me. I just was led to ask that question. But from the time I asked that question, that was the talking point for the campaign, no matter what area of Florida I went. And because what it did was it immediately connected that person to someone who they cared about who's made a mistake. And so I didn't start my conversation with, yeah, I'm doing this effort. This is a progressive effort, or this is this type of effort to restore voting rights. Or, you know, I didn't start with, hey, I am a returning citizen who needs, no, I started with something, a simple question that immediately connected with someone who they love. And then the follow-up question was, and do you think that they deserve a second chance? And let me tell you, 99 out of 100 would say yes. And it was that blood connection that we actually formed like immediately. The other piece to that too is, rather than engaging in some type of conversation where maybe even I'm using language that they do not understand. And so that's the thing that I noticed, that there are different sets of languages, right, to be used. I mean, there are times, and I'll be 100%. I'm in a meeting and I hear folks using a language that I was not even uh, uh, clear with. You know, you talking about the LGBTQ, right? There was a time when I was in rooms and I was trying to figure out, okay, what does the LG and the T stand for? You know, and then when they expanded the letters, I had to try to learn that too. And so, if people who are already supportive of the LGBTQ movement, right, may have had a hard time tracking, right, even some of the language there, then what do we think was happening with folks who were not in these rooms, who were not exposed to this on a daily basis, right? There's a level of communication that's going to be, or a gap between the level of communication that's going to be missed. And that gap is a crucial gap to determine whether or not someone is supportive or not. And so, even in my conversations around Amendment 4, I wanted to keep it simple. I learned that in the rooms, in the AA rooms. Keep it simple, stupid, and keep it at a language where no matter who I talk to, they could quickly grasp where I'm coming from, and they could quickly identify someone who they love, that they can now apply the concept, whatever it was that I was speaking to them about, they could apply it to their loved ones. So I just wanted to share that before you moved on.
Yeah, totally. No, it's so much of it is about listening and meeting people where they are and connecting to the values that they that they hold. You know, as we started talking about marriage, we would you know, similar to what you were saying, Desmond, we would often, you know, we did a lot of deep canvassing, deep door-to-door canvassing, and you know, we sort of the marriage movement sort of developed some of that deep, you know, really engaging with people at the door. And, you know, we'd ask open-ended questions like, can you tell us what's important about your marriage? um, and, you know, and we'd often ask also, because, you know, we'd ask people their perspective on marriage for same-sex couples. And often they'd say, well, you know, I'm conflicted. I have my religion this. And then, you know, we wouldn't even shy away from, some people really wanted to shy away from getting into religion. Well, you know, it's not really my job to do, but it's like, you know, what's important to you about your religion? What, you know, what is, and usually they would end up with some version of the golden rule of treating others the way I want to be treated, rather than, you know, this is what, you know, I believe in every aspect of the good book. And you know, so what we had to do was to listen to why marriage mattered to people who we were talking to, and show them, not really tell them, but show them that same-sex, you know, that gay and lesbian folks cared about the very same issues. It was, you know, it's about love and commitment and responsibility and wanting to be with your partner, your spouse, making a lifetime commitments, sometimes wanting to raise kids in the context of a family, and the ultimate way in our society of you know, of respecting a relationship and committing is through marriage. And so that's what we wanted. That's what same-sex couples wanted. And once people got it in their guts, you know, and also started seeing different types of people who wanted to get married, who were married, and we'll talk about messengers in just a minute. You know, that's when it started to sink in. Oh, I get it now. This isn't a political statement. This isn't, you know, this isn't to just try to show us up or anything like that. This is they want the same thing that we want, and why shouldn't we give it to them? That was the so next slide. Okay, so this is about messengers, and you know, Desmond and I also on Amendment 4 did a lot of work on messengers. So what we found in the marriage work, and you know, is, and I think this applies to so many different movements, is, you know, find people who can, you know, it sounds obvious, but find people who can connect with those you're trying to persuade. So what we found in the marriage work is that the people who were best able to connect with those we were trying to persuade wasn't so much gay and lesbian people themselves, it was their parents. Because, straight folks could connect to other straight folks who, like, I'll show you an ad with this couple. These are sort of really wonderful, very regular folks in Maine, the Redekers. They church going, and one day their daughter came out to them and told them that she was lesbian, and and they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know anything about gay, like, what is it? And so other parents can find them, could connect with them, because they're like, oh, I might not truly understand what it's like to be attracted to someone of the same gender, and that seems like a step too far, but I can understand being in the place where my kid comes to me and tells me this, and what am I going to want for my kid? I'm probably going to want the same thing the Redekers want for their kid. And so we used a ton of parents. We also used local people. Like, this ad was for the Maine ballot initiative on marriage. We found, we just interviewed lots and lots of people and found local folks on super targeted campaigns. We'd find people from people's neighborhoods. When we were working on lawmakers, we'd find people who went to the same high school as them, around the same age as them, went to the same church, played on the same sports teams, and to build that real connection. So it was no longer those people out there in San Francisco. It's that nice couple that lives down the block I see walking their dog every morning, and on and on and on. And then unexpected supporters. And I know people probably aren't in the best mood to talk about Republicans right now, but both Desmond and I were very focused on finding Republicans to who embraced our perspective. On Amendment 4, we were able to get the Koch brothers to come on board, and and talk about why they believed that it was right, that once you paid your dues to society, you should have a second chance. In the marriage movement, he was never, ever my favorite person in the world, but I quoted Dick Cheney probably 800 times. Freedom means freedom for everyone. And so it's because, it's not necessarily because we love these folks, it's because we want to win. And we want to expand the base and give people openings. Like, it's like, oh wow, if the Koch say this, or Dick Cheney says that, and I'm sort of ideologically connected to them, then maybe I can be on board too.
So, and guess what, Mark? And here's the obvious, right? Here's the obvious, is that even when you look at LGBTQ community, right, it is not defined by its political beliefs, right? And I used to tell folks that when I got arrested, the police didn't ask me if I was Democrat or Republican, right? When I was in front of a judge and he sentenced me, he didn't ask me if I was Democrat or Republican. And the harsh reality, or the reality of all of this really, is the fact that these issues, or the thing, or the causes that we take up, don't just impact one group of people. It actually transcends, right, partisan lines, right? And the tragedy is when we take something that impacts everyone and politicize it to the point to where now it's detrimental to just a select group of folks, right? And so when you talk about removing that issue, removing that barrier, and I'm talking about restoring voting rights to people who made mistakes, right? I was very clear that, man, listen, we were fighting just as hard for that person who wanted to vote for Donald Trump as we were for that person who wished they could have voted for Barack Obama, because we understood that the true, especially if you're talking about being a true champion of democracy, that is creating a system which everyone gets a say in how our government is ran, not just only the people who think like me or whatever, or look like me, but everyone. And coming from that base, or from that perspective, really allowed us to lay down the groundwork, right, that made it easier for people who were conservative, right, to see, number one, their loved ones who are conservative not being able to vote, all right, or people who are conservative policymakers or influencers, being able to see that, yes, it's not just Democrats. I mean, when I came onto this work, I thought it was only Black people that couldn't vote in Florida. I really did. And that speaks to how we need to be careful with our communication and our narrative, right? Because we can create a misconception that makes it harder for us to do the work, right? And so as long as people were thinking, oh, it's only Black people who can't vote in Florida, and we know Black people, they all vote Democrat, and so we definitely can't be for this, right? Because if we're for the restoration of voting rights, that means we're going to give Democrats the advantage. So we're going to go through hell and high water to stop this from happening. But when they see this as an all-American issue that impacts people from all walks of life and all political persuasions and connected to someone who they love, now, right, we have an opportunity to marshal the vote and support that all the experts thought was impossible. We was actually able to do it, right? And let me tell you, that recreational marijuana amendment, let me tell you, they spent over $101 million, right? We only spent a little over $20 million, right? And the more controversial thing. And so how you're messaging, right, and how you're connecting with people in a very authentic and holistic way has an impact on all of this. It really does.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And, you know, both Desmond and I we also had very practical aims. I mean, in addition to sort of the, you know, the in some ways I call it like a spiritual aim of wanting to talk to everybody and connect with everybody, you know, to win Amendment 4, we needed to get 60+% of the vote, which means we needed people who were voting for, who had voted for Donald Trump, who were voting for Ron DeSantis, who were voting for Rick Scott to vote for this amendment. On marriage equality, we knew that to win nationwide, we were going to need to win at the Supreme Court. And that meant that we were going to need some Republican appointed justices to be with us. And so if it felt like, and actually was like the fact only Democrats, only progressives supported it, we'd be in trouble. And so, you know, the guy who wrote the ultimate decision, Anthony Kennedy, was appointed by Reagan, and you know, so we knew that to make the issue a, you know, a broad-based enough one that where we could actually win nationwide at the Supreme Court, we needed to make our case.
Mark, I often ask people this question: if your house was burnt, if your house was on fire, and the firemen came to your house to put out the fire, are you going to stop them to check their voter registration card to see if they were registered Democrats?
No.
No. Listen, in life critical situations and juncture, we give a damn, right, what a person's political beliefs are. When we respond to natural disasters or emergencies, and you respond to an accident where someone is laying on the ground, I promise you, your first question is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump? In those moments, right, it's in those moments that we see the purity of ourselves and who we are as a community, who we are as a nation, as a people, right? And those things that tend to divide us and make us not want to use that person as a spokesperson, or make us not want to have a conversation with that person, though all of those things go out of the window. And so I am a firm believer that in our natural state, without all of the propaganda, without all of the divisiveness that comes from both sides, right? In a state without all of that, we have this genuine concern, a genuine need to be connected with each other and to care about each other, to love each other. And I think when we operate from that perspective, right, people can see through fakeness. Right? If you gritting your teeth and I really don't want to talk to them, I'm gonna have to talk to them. No, when they see that you actually do care about them as a human being, and will not allow the color of their skin or their political beliefs to turn you off, when they see that, this man, that is powerful. That is powerful. And so I always encourage people to let's be courageous enough to go beyond the superficial, right? The superficial world that keeps us divided, right? And be courageous to dig a little deeper. You might find somebody you end up loving, right? For real. You find somebody that you end up loving, right? And it will change your mind. It will change your whole perspective and allow you to be an even more effective communicator. That's my version of dropping the mic there.
All right, I think next we're up to the videos, right? So we're going to share 4 videos, 2 from the marriage fight. These are 30-second spots that appeared on TV, 2 from the marriage equality fights and 2 from the Amendment 4 fights. And then we're going to wrap up and pretty quickly and move into Q&A.
My husband and I have been married 32 years.
42.
40.
We weren't always so gay friendly. We didn't even grow up in an era where it was discussed.
We had just found out our daughter was gay. There was a lot of emotions. We went to see a priest, and I will never forget the answer that he told me. She is the same person that you loved yesterday.
We love our daughter.
I would be very happy if my oldest daughter could get married at home.
I can't imagine anyone loving a person as much as I love my wife. Alabama does not recognize our marriage. Everyone wants to believe that if you do what you're supposed to do, your family will be taken care of. But we don't have that safeguard, that every child can feel good about the home they come from. Isn't that what matters?
This is Brett. He was addicted to opioids and has a nonviolent felony conviction. Now he's clean, has completed the term, and is helping others.
My story is not unique. You know, I've met people with very similar stories of redemption.
In the state of Florida, people who have been convicted of felonies are not allowed to vote. With Amendment 4, when someone like Brett has paid their debts, they're eligible to vote again. Let's give Floridians a second chance. When a debt is paid, it is paid. Vote yes on 4.
Who needs a second chance? Alan fought overseas defending our freedoms. Brett is working to be the best father he can. They're some of the 1.4 million people who Florida permanently bans from voting, even though they've served their time and paid their debts. With Amendment 4, people convicted of felonies, when they've served all the terms ordered by a judge, earn back their eligibility to vote. Amendment 4 says, when a debt is paid, it's paid. Vote yes.
There's that handsome fellow right there. All right, I think there are a couple more slides and then we'll get into Q&A. So this is one example I was super proud of. One, you know, I'm not shocked by too many things in the social movement space, but this was one that shocked me. I worked on in California on Proposition 8, which was the one amendment that took away the freedom to marry for same-sex couples. And, you know, the significant majority of the $50 million that our opponents spent against us was from the Mormon Church. And they were really the lead opponents to that amendment and could not have been more opposed. Fast forward, you know, more than a decade, and what we were working after the Supreme Court did its Dobbs decision, taking away the right to an abortion. You know, we on Capitol Hill, our allies, move forward with legislation to, as much as could be done, codify the marriage ruling. And believe it or not, the Mormon Church was with us on the legislation. They still say that they don't support you know, marriage for gay couples, but that we'd struck good balance around protecting religious liberty, and they'd softened their opposition really significantly, and were part of stood behind the bill and backed it. And and I saw that play out in a really stark way. The governor in Massachusetts during the first marriage ruling was Mitt Romney, who could not have been more opposed to that ruling when it came out. He actually compared it to the Dred Scott decision, believe it or not. And then he voted in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022. So people do change, people do evolve. Religious denominations can change. It's people say it's the word of God until it changes, or their understanding of God changes, and all really deep comprehensive change can happen. And so that was just a really powerful one for the LGBT community. And I think one more slide, and I think we're
Yeah, we
we're done.
are. Yeah, I'm happy to move us. So first, I'm going to say thank you multiple times, Mark and Desmond. Thank you. And I'm going to move us into, we
And
have some questions.
1:57, we were supposed to hit an hour, and how about that?
Okay.
All right.
We get snaps for all kinds of things. I'm like, okay, timely. So we have some questions that came in from folks, and so I'm going to kick us off. We had one come in from Johnny, who asked, what are some signs that a person is or isn't persuadable? And I'll kick that to either one of you or both of you.
Go ahead.
I got to tell, I got these quick story to tell. So let me tell you, right? I'm gonna validate myself with this. I traveled around Florida so much that when I looked at my odometer a couple of years into this work, I realized that I was averaging over 50,000 miles a year, driving around the state of Florida, having conversations with real people, right? So, I know a lot of these pollings, they poll 100 people and say, okay, this is what America believes, whatever. Listen, I polled thousands of people with some face-to-face conversations. And in those conversations, like I said earlier, I would come with this question about, hey, do you know someone who you love who's ever made a mistake or whatever? And everyone would say, yes, they do. And once they say yes, I would think, oh, yes, I got them now, right? In all the years that I did it, and it was about a good 2 years of this on the ground, only 2 people actually said no. And there was no way I could have determined that they were not going to be persuadable. One was a Latino clergy member who happened to be in a biker bar. I still haven't figured out why was he in a biker bar to begin with. But once you hear a clergy member, he said, yeah, I'm a pastor, you will automatically think he believes in forgiveness and redemption. This guy was dead set against it. I already knew I was not going to change him. The other guy was a guy in a Jacksonville Jaguar tailgate party. And I remember that I was walking up to this big white guy. First thing he says, I'm voting for Donald Trump. Right? And I said, well, congratulations. You have that right to do that. And then I asked him, I said, do you know anybody that you love who's ever made a mistake? And he said, yeah, my son. And in my heart just jumped. I'm going to get this Trump supporter to actually support Amendment 4 because his son made a mistake. And I said, don't you want your son to be able to vote again? And this guy looked me dead in my eye and said, hell no, my son is too damn stupid. I don't ever want him voting. And only thing I could do was shake the man's hand, thank him for his time, and walk away. Those are the only 2 people from traveling all the different in every county in the state of Florida, speaking to thousands of people. Those are the only 2 people that I knew that I would never, ever convince to support Amendment 4, right? But everyone else, and I would have never guessed that someone whose son was impacted by the criminal justice system and a pastor would actually be against it. And so even the folks that look like they could be against it and may initially talk like they're against it, there's a lot of hope in changing people's hearts and minds. So those are my story. I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, and just to echo or build on what Desmond said, be very careful about making assumptions about who's going to be with or against. Like I remember, when I was doing field marriage and going up to, a 80 some odd year old woman who, who was holding rosary beads. And I was like, oh God, this is not going to go well. And she's like, oh my God, I have the cutest grandson. I hope he gets married. Da, 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 he's gay. And then I've gone up to younger people who are like, no. But in the context of a campaign, sometimes you do have to make decisions about, resources. And like in some of our door-to-door work, we'd ask a question. We'd ask them, we wanted to talk to people who were swing voters. And so we'd ask them, do you support marriage for same-sex couples? And if they said no, we'd ask, do you support civil union or another form of recognition? If they said no to that, we'd pretty much, in a canvas climate, we'd pretty much walk to the, thank them for their time and walk to the next door. If they said if they said yes, I support this, but not that, then we'd really engage. And same on the other, if we'd ask people if they supported marriage, and then we said, well, if you could choose between marriage and civil, and they said yes, and then we'd say, well, if you could choose between marriage and civil union, and they said, oh no, I'm for marriage. We'd thank them for their support and move on because we knew they didn't need a persuasion pitch. But if they said, well, if I had all these options, I might choose another option, then we'd stick with them and talk for longer. So they're like in a ballot campaign, a legislative campaign, you don't need to win over everybody. And I think that is also a fundamental thing as well. Like, you want to spend 80% of your time on the people who need you, not the people who are 1,000% with you, or people who are never, I never say never, but people who, are less likely to come your way.
No, that's super helpful. I think one of the things that we talk about at Policy Link, if it's helpful for folks as well, is that we do an annual attitudinal survey. And so what we recognize specifically within it is only 10% of folks are our base. And many times folks spend a lot of time talking to their base. And we know to get to about 49%, you are in your persuadables. And so I always coach folks, and Desmond and Mark, if this doesn't hit, you let me know. But I coach folks and say sometimes, there's like the folks that you make eye contact with in a room and you're like, yes, like I found my person. Thank you for being here with me. And there's someone else that you're like nodding. You're like, okay. And then they say something that just went way. You're like, wait, we were together. What did you just say? That's a persuadable person as opposed to your opposition, right? So I think there's also some things in there that I might put out there for you to consider in your conversations. All right, we have
You're on mute. You're on mute if you're a.
Oh, Desmond.
Okay, great. I was saying there was another piece to that too as well.
Tell me.
And I think it beats the opposition to the point, right? And this, so I always frame it this way, right? I'm a parent. I have 4 boys and 1 girl. You know what the most scariest thing for me was as a parent? And Mark, you may have to come to this at some point too, right?
I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I have other scary things.
It's coming.
Not these, I'm sure.
The scariest thing for me, right, was talking to my kids about sex. That was like, I was terrified, right? And my wife would laugh at me, right? Well, you gonna talk to the boys about, the birds and the bees, and that was like very terrifying. But what got me over the hump was the thought that if I don't talk to my son or daughter about sex, somebody else will. And then I had to choose, do I want the internet to teach my daughter about sex, or do I want it to be me and my wife, right? And in this political world, there were so many, and that's why I told you when you had that quote up there earlier, I was like, oh, that comes from Donald Trump's playbook, right? Because there were so many people who we ignored, who we didn't even have a conversation with, and somebody came along and did have that conversation, right? And was able to make them feel a sense of belonging, and it was off to the races, right? And having these conversations initially on an initiative with folks are not expecting to be for us to be talking to, we're actually able to plant a seed and get them before their defenses go up, right? And what happens is by being able to plant a seed, and we've seen this, Mark, a quick story, 2 months before the election, we brought a whole bunch of hyper pro Trump support. You remember this, Mark? Trump supporters in a room.
Desmond had a lot of Trump supporter friends.
Listen, and we showed them 2 crazy videos. Basically, one video said, if you vote for Amendment 4, MS-13, which was, would come and invade Florida and like kill your children and rape your women, right? It was that ad there. And remember, that was the same year that Matt Gaetz put out the ad attacking immigration reform. And he had this pretty blonde white woman walking in a suburban neighborhood. And when she turned around, it was a person that was made to look like he was an immigrant in front of her with a gun to her face. And all you heard was a gunshot, right? And that was and this was on the air. And so that same year, we're showing people this video that says MS-13 is going to invade Florida. Or it was another video that said, if you vote yes on Amendment 4, that it would be a death blow to Donald Trump, right? And these flaming liberals would take over the state of Florida, right? After showing that, when we polled them, we were still in the supermajority. We were still in the supermajority, and we had amongst that group of people more than enough votes to meet the 60% threshold, right? And I'm telling you, that doesn't happen anywhere else. If you don't plant a seed, if you're not willing to have those conversations early on, because they were able to hold on to the thought about someone who they loved, right? And so you could say, oh, this is a Democrat, this is the woke folks, or all kinds of stuff. They were still able to withstand those attacks because we planted a seed early on. And so we got to beat people. We got to beat the opposition to the punch, right? We can't wait to react to the opposition. You've got to beat them to the punch, right? And take it to their backyard and take it to their people, and you'll be surprised. Once again, I'm saying you'll be surprised what can happen.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm down for the surprises, especially when, so I'm gonna take us to a next question that actually came in from Debbie Lamb. So the Supreme Court will soon make a ruling on a Tennessee law on transgender care. Do you think the approach you adopted relating to marriage equality would have been equally successful approach in this case?
Well,
maybe
so
Mark,
first of all, yeah, I'm paying super close attention, and in fact, my firm is working with the ACLU on that very case. Here's what I would say is the answer. So I'd phrase the question a little differently, but the answer is yes. These same approaches are exactly what needs to happen, in my view, on trans issues. I mean, first, I would say that trans issues have come so far. Like, there's not a debate about, there used to be debates, a decade ago about trans adults, and that's not front and center. People are grappling, right? People right now are grappling with who transgender people are, what it means to be trans. Some of the same questions they grappled with 20 years ago about what it means to be gay, why are we gay? And so I do think it's for people who are well-meaning, who don't totally get it. We, both trans people and allies, need to listen and engage and share. And that's not going to, those aren't the answers to, people who I would call like real haters, or people who really just want to use trans people as a political weapon, like they did gay people as a political weapon. But for people who are grappling with, and I think that my view is that most of Americans are grappling with this question, like, okay, what does it mean if my kid said that they were trans and wanted to take, wanted to address it as a, as a 14, 15-year-old. I think that we just need to engage with those folks in a really respectful way in order to win. It's not to do it just out of a sense of doing it. These are challenging, painful, very personal conversations. But in order to win, you need to engage. And they're going to be, I think the reason I said I wanted to rephrase the question a bit is, is this notion of would have been an equally successful approach. I think the trans community is doing this work, and this work is happening. And there are Supreme Court cases, and like the marriage movement lost 30 ballot initiatives before we won our first ballot initiative. These were not initiatives that we brought. They were initiatives our opponents brought. So, we were doing the work. We were doing the work in places where we were doing better, Massachusetts and, the Northeast and, and places where we could win in court. And then, our opponents would put something on the ballot in Alabama and Texas, and we'd, get our butts kicked. And so it's, and that's part of the, that's all part of the movements. And so the work is happening. I think this case is a great opportunity to educate people. I think the arguments are opportunities to educate about, okay, what does it mean to be again, I think parents are such powerful messengers. What does it mean to be a parent and have your kid come to you and tell you that they're trans? Ultimately, it might be a shock, but you want your kid to be happy. You want them to be able to be okay. And so, and every parent wants that. So I think that's work that is happening now. I got to say, I just really disdain the fact that that the Trump campaign really used trans people in the ways that they did this past election cycle. But I do believe that we will win that fight as well.
I'll take us to the next question that came in from Rachel from Rhinebeck. She loves your wisdom. No surprise there. I think there's others in the chat that gave lots of love, but specifically our question. I'm wondering if you can speak to any differences or strategic changes that might be needed between shifting perceptions and hearts and minds versus changing behavior. Should they be considered separately? What does support mean to you? How do you know when you've achieved it? One more time. You got it? Okay. I was like, I could read it again. So speak to any differences or strategic changes that might be needed between shifting perceptions and hearts and minds versus changing behaviors.
So could we tag team on this, Mark?
Sure.
All right. So part of this is when I heard the question the first time, what came to mind is that, we always talk about changing hearts and minds, right? That's something that that phrase have been with me since I started advocacy work. And what I've learned over the last couple of years, actually, I would say more than a couple, probably the past 10 years, is that part of it is also a willingness for us to change our hearts and minds, right? And sometimes when we step into this work, with the concept that, okay, we have the answer to the solution, right, or the solution to the problem that we face as a society. And our approach, a way of solving it, is the only approach. It's the most perfect approach, right? And we operate from that standpoint, and it causes us a lot of headaches and a lot of grief. And because when number one, we talk about it the way that we think we should talk about it, and we actually create an echo chamber that ends up eventually getting disconnected from grassroots, or getting disconnected from a significant population, right? And it's just this group of folks that are in this echo chamber that keeps building up that thought, and it drowns everything else out, and we think that this is the only thing, and we end up getting harshly disappointed at the end. And we see a lot of burnout. We see some suicides in our work. you know, a lot of frustrations, a lot of divorces. I mean, our movement have suffered a lot over the last few years, and part of it is because of that stance, right? The thing is, I remember when I was in law school, and I would, you know, my opening line in closing arguments was, if I would ask you what you're looking at, chances are you would say you're looking at my hand. But that is not entirely true, because just like this case, this hand has two sides, right? Which says that no matter what we look at, someone from a different upbringing or a different experience could be looking at the same thing but see something a little differently, right? And who are we to be the appointee to say, well, you need to look at or see things the way I am seeing things? If we're going to effectively organize, and not just people who are already going to agree with us, but if we're going to effectively organize, then we have to walk into a situation willing to say, well, let me learn where this person is coming from, and let me see their point of view, their perspective, right? And because what that may do, and I don't say it does it all the time, it may cause us to actually now refine our message, or even take a slightly different approach, because now we're no longer just only thinking from our perspective, right? But we're actually seeing something else. And here's a danger that we have, and I'm not saying the whole movement, but there are parts in this movement to where a person would say 1 + 1 is 3. And it would sound so good, right? And everybody is ashing and everybody is snapping their fingers. And there are people in that group that in their head they're saying, I thought 1 + 1 was 2. But because everybody's snapping their fingers, they dare not raise their voice. And they go to snapping their fingers to show, yeah, I'm in unison, I'm in unison. And the reality is that we end up creating a situation where we're not even challenging our own perspectives within our own circles, right? And there have to be a willingness to do that, because if we're going to be so rigid, right, we're going to end up getting uprooted, right? When those powerful winds come, we have to be able to be fluid. We have to be able to be malleable to a certain extent, right? And we have to be able to consider other people's point of view. Like when we talk about, you know, changing the type of funding that we want law enforcement to have, we got to remember Mr. and Mrs. Joe, who is 80 years old, that living in the community, how they view the police and how they're viewing crime in their community, and how, you know, if they hear us say defund the police, they're looking at us like we crazy. Like, what are these young whippersnappers talking about? Right? Heck no. And we've seen that reaction in New York and other places where there was significant backlash, right? And so I think that being able to understand how Mrs. and Mrs. Joe in the community view, right, what crime is all about, what safety is all about, helps us have a deeper conversation, and help us be more effective in our communication. And guess what? It just might mean that not only are we changing their hearts and minds, but they're changing ours as well. And we have to be willing to have our hearts and minds changed. You can have the second half, Mark.
I think you gave a great answer, but I just think you know, what you were saying makes me reflect on the fact that I think for progressives, for you know, to win back power in the country, is that we're gonna need to have these conversations with as unpleasant as it feels, and it really does feel unpleasant. We're gonna need to have these conversations with the you know, with parts of the majority of the country that voted for Donald Trump, to really understand, to listen to them. Like, you know, I'm not saying you know, the true believers or people who love everything this guy stands for, but you know, out of even, you know, even if you don't believe it's a moral imperative, et cetera, or it feels terrible, it's like, in order to win back, we're going to need to engage. And so that's what you were just saying, Desmond, reminds me of is that, you know, and I do think people are conflicted on, you know, people have lots of things going through their heads when they cast a ballot. And I think that, you know, I'm ultimately optimistic, but it's going to take some real engagement and not treating people as, you know, as idiots or lesser than.
So does that mean that, you know, for people who are champions of, for our champions of democracy who say 5 years ago or even far as 10 years ago said that yes, we are fighting right to have an inclusive democracy and we want everybody to be able to have a say in how their government is ran, right? Are we talking about those people who now that the election didn't turn out that way is now going to say, well, if you voted for this guy, I hate you or you're an idiot? Are we talking about those people? I mean, because we have to listen. We have to have those kind of hard conversations and those hard looks in the mirror, right? Because you cannot go out there and organize someone or move someone if when you show them who you are, it's not authentic.
Right. That's the same.
Right?
It was the same thing like in California that we had to do when, you know, we lost Proposition 8 on marriage 52 to 48, and we needed to engage with people who voted against us. And if you don't do that in an honest way, then you're going to be stuck where you are.
And that's why I tell folks, Mark, don't get mad at the person that voted for Donald Trump. Get motivated to change your communication tactics so you can actually change that person's heart and mind, that you can actually change the way that person votes. But I cannot get mad at somebody for exercising the right to vote, because that's what I fought for. So you can have the right to vote however you want to vote. My job now is to convince you, right, maybe to vote like me. And so if somebody went another way, I don't call them an idiot. I look at myself and understand, well, maybe I was not effective as a messenger as I should have been. Maybe I didn't connect with them in a more profound way, right? And so the challenge now is on me to figure out how can we communicate to these very same people in a way that allows them to make even better decisions, right, in upcoming elections. But not to ostracize them, because those are the same people that you said, I'm going to have to go right back to.
The irony, eh?
I'm going to have to go right back to them. So
right.
I just called you an idiot yesterday, and now I'm asking you to vote to support this. You can't do it.
I hear you. I'm receiving it. I'm receiving it. I'm challenge is the next person. So I'm hearing it. I'm gonna, I think this might be our last question. I'm gonna take the liberty of combining a couple of questions from folks, and I dropped it into it. So Desmond and Mark, how do you still see the positive after all the years and the work? And the second part of that is one piece of advice for folks who are on this call. What would it be?
Well, I'm happy to go first and leave the final words to Desmond. So I think number one, I'm fundamentally an optimist, and I believe that even at the most distressing hours, and for me personally, this presidential loss was a really, really, really distressing hour. Unfortunately, more than an hour. But I believe that we can win. We can, meaning people who share the values that I share can prevail. In some ways, and this is in the spirit of what Desmond has been saying, in some ways, I think it's probably better for us that we actually didn't win a majority this time, and we actually, we can't sort of fall back, well, if the electoral college were different, and that it's like, no, we actually got our butts kicked this time. I mean, it wasn't a landslide, et cetera, but we lost the popular vote, we lost the electoral vote. So we need to go out and persuade. And I believe, I think I'd have a really hard time doing this work if I didn't believe that ultimately love and connecting with people's better angels is a more powerful tool, a more powerful feeling, emotion than the feeling of division and fear. And so I believe it can be done. And I feel lucky enough that I've seen it in my own life, in the movements that I've worked on marriage, in the movement I got to work on for a couple of years with Desmond, and in other movements as well, including the movement for trans equality, even though we're not fully there yet. We still have ways to go. I also have people that inspire me. I'm inspired by, I should say, maybe this is a better way to put it. I'm motivated. Like, I had a tough time coming out and a tough time accepting who I was. And I am really motivated to creating a world where where there is no closet. People don't have to be in the closet, where people, once they recognize who they are, they're like, oh, this is how I feel, and it's okay. And so I want to create that kind of world. And I want that kind of world for everybody. Oh, you know what? To be closeted about having done something foolish when I was a kid and gotten arrested for it. Why should I have to be closeted about that too? It's like, so that's also a motivator for me. And then what would I encourage people on this call to do? Well, other than going out and buying Desmond's book, I'd encourage them to also find something, like to stick with it. I think that what I find a lot in movements is that people can get discouraged quickly. They can burn out. They can put everything into something, and then it doesn't work out. But it's like this great one of my favorite quotes, Frederick Douglass quote, that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And so it's like, if you're fighting for something big, you're going to have to stick with it. It's not going to happen overnight. If it happens overnight, it wasn't all that big. It never works that way. So please, please, please take time for yourself, take care of yourself, and then pick back up and keep at it.
Mark, the world is a better place. It's a much better place because of you, man. And I'm going to try to be as quick as I possibly can about being the positive. And I hope it's some fitness junkies on this call, or some people that's good with anatomy and with the physiology. But there's only one way to grow muscle, right? There's only one way. And the way is that you have to tear a muscle, right? And then when it heals, another layer of muscle grows over it. Then you have to tear that one, and you get another layer of muscle going. And the only way that you tear that muscle is if that part of the body experience some type of resistance, right? That's hard enough that you have to force your way through it. That is the only way. The only way we get stronger is actually by being able to fight through resistance. And so if we don't experience resistance, we actually become weaker, right? And so as a result of this, I've learned to embrace the challenges. I've learned to embrace the tensions, because it is only through fighting those that I become stronger, or that we become stronger, or that this country becomes stronger, right? And so when I look at, as a person that's been down in the dumps, a person that's been homeless and getting ready to kill herself, I look at moments like this as opportunities. That's what it is. It's an opportunity for us to show up a certain way, or it's an opportunity for us to lay down, but it's an opportunity. And you have to decide which way you want to go. And let me tell you, as far as the word of advice, I'm going to tell you the way to go. The way to go is by keeping ourselves in that uncomfortable position, right? And I'm going to use the word that Mark used, because I believe in it. And that is, let me tell you, it is easy to love someone who confers a benefit to you. If Mark gives me the winning lotto numbers, man, I'm loving Mark to death. You know what I'm saying? Mark, Laura, Laura, anybody makes me feel good, it's easy for me to say, I love you. I love you, sis. I love you, brother, But that's not the type of love that's in the Bible. That's not the type of love that my higher power talks about, right? It's not impressive. You don't impress me by loving somebody that makes you feel good, but gives you something. Well, how you impress me or how power is by loving someone who you despise, loving someone who you fear, being able to love someone who you may at one point have looked down upon. Your ability to love them is what is impressive, right? It's that same type of love that Martin Luther King Jr. talks about, right? Understanding that if you respond to someone who hates you with hate, you just perpetuate the hate. And the hate keeps growing, right? If you respond to violence with violence, you do that, the same thing, fear with fear. What breaks that cycle is responding to that with love. And so the advice that I would give that would actually make you and the movement and this country stronger is to respond to this adversity with love. With love. Find someone, like what Mark would say, who you may not agree with, but get to know them. Learn to love them, right? Because if only thing is in your head and in your heart is resist, 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 then you're just perpetuating. Because what happens if the shoe's on the other foot? And the other side want to resist, resist, resist. Are they wrong? So obviously, we have to respond differently, right? And when we do so, we break that cycle and let me tell you, folks already know our moves 5 steps ahead of us. That's why they're always ahead of the game, right? Because they know how we react. We need to react differently to break this cycle. And the best way I know to react differently, and the advice that I would give you, is to lead with love, right? And not the love that you're going to give to somebody who gave you money or gave you a grant, right? But the love that for someone that may have voted the way that you didn't like them to vote. Get to love them and talk to them and learn them, and you just might win this thing.
Mark and Desmond, I hope you can feel the snaps in the room. Thank you so much for today. Thank you for everyone who joined us. You can scan this QR code if you want to sign up for our narrative newsletter. I know we didn't get to all of your questions. This is my beautiful opportunity to try to see if I can get Mark and Desmond to do a blog with me that we put in the narrative newsletter. Don't answer yet. Don't answer. Oh, look at that thumbs. Then answer. But no, it was a joy to be in community with you today. Thank you for joining us, Desmond and Mark. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Take good care.
Thank you, everyone.